Thank you for listening to the Working Together Vice President Standards and Recording Secretary webinar. My name is Jenna Wiesner, and I currently serve as one of the two assistants to the Director of Standards. I'm responsible for Regions 5, 6, and 7, and Theta Province. I've served as a chapter advisor in many capacities, as well as the Province Director of Chapters for Epsilon South Province. I graduated from the University of Iowa, and my husband and I currently live in our hometown of Peoria, Illinois, where I work at PNC Bank doing client and community relations. Presenting with me is Katie Stovall, Regional Director of Chapters for Region 4, and I will go ahead and let her introduce herself.
Hi, Jenna. Thanks. I am the Regional Director of Chapters for Region 4, which is Oklahoma, Texas, Missouri, Louisiana, and Arkansas. I also served as a chapter advisor in several capacities at Drake University, which is where I graduated from, and then also served as the Province Director of Chapters for Zeta West.
Great, thank you. During this webinar, we will be focusing on how the VPS and the Recording Secretary should be working together. We will cover chapter meeting absences, mandatory event absences such as initiation, Founders Day, membership recruitment, and selection meetings. We will also cover unexcused absences, when and how to refer a member to the Standards Committee, making revisions to chapter bylaws and standing rules, as well as some keys to success. I will let Katie start by going over chapter meeting absences.
Thanks, Jenna. So before each chapter council meeting, the recording secretary should collect excuses from members who are unable to attend a chapter meeting. Most have a day or two in advance that they like to get these. Some are 24 hours. Make sure you find a process that works well for the recording secretary so that she knows. These excuses will then be presented to the chapter council for a majority vote. Acceptable excuses should be outlined in the chapter standing rules. And examples of these are illness, family emergencies, required class, school conflicts, a valid emergency. We want to make sure that we're allowing our members to have activities outside of the chapter, like class, which is why we're on campus. Once these are approved or unapproved, the recording secretary will notify the chapter member of the chapter council's decision. So also required events are initiation and Founders Day. So these should have written excuses, and they must be submitted to the chapter council advisor prior to initiation. So we don't want to go back and try to excuse something after the fact. And this is per the Fraternity Standing Rules, Rule 10. Written excuses for missing Founders Day must be submitted in advance as well to the chapter council advisor. These excuses should be around illness, family emergency, class, school conflict, valid emergencies, much like chapter meetings. The chapter council advisor will notify the chapter member and the recording secretary of her decision, and she notifies the recording secretary as well so that the recording secretary can make sure to keep track of which absences were excused or unexcused. Recruitment and membership selection are also required events for our chapter members. Written excuses for any part of work week or recruitment must be submitted to the membership advisor for approval. And these go to the membership advisor because she has a good understanding of what was required during that week. Deadline of when written excuses must be submitted should be outlined in the chapter standing rules. Acceptable excuses fall along the same lines: illness, family emergency, class, an internship, school conflict, or other conflicts determined by the chapter. The membership advisor will notify the member as well as the recording secretary of her decision on if these are excused or unexcused. So the chapter should establish an attendance rule for unexcused absences and include it in the standing rules. Suggested guidelines for non-mandatory chapter events and chapter meetings are as follows. First, unexcused absence. Following the first unexcused absence, the recording secretary shall contact the chapter member. Usually, a chapter member can have one or two unexcused absences. Things get in the way, life happens, and this gives them the leeway to have that occur. After the second unexcused absence, the Standards Committee shall contact the member. So in between there, after the second excused absence, the recording secretary shall let the Standards Committee liaison knows that this member has 2 unexcused absences. Following the 3rd unexcused absence, the chapter member shall be invited to attend a meeting of the Standards Committee. And this is just a check-in, and I believe Jen is going to cover this a little bit more in depth as we go along.
Great, thanks, Katie.
Yep.
So once a member has reached their 2nd unexcused absence, that's when the Standards Committee really starts to take part in this process. So as Katie mentioned, following the 2nd unexcused absence, the recording secretary should be sure to contact their Standards Committee liaison and let them know that they need to contact the member who has this absence. Each week, the Standards Committee liaison should be following up with the recording secretary just so that they can always be on the same page. Once the recording secretary and the Standards Committee liaison have chatted about the member's absence, the Standards Committee liaison should then contact the member who has had those 2 unexcused absences. She should check in with that member and ask if there are any issues and remind them that if they get one more unexcused absence, they'll need to meet with the VPS and her committee in a standards meeting. Now, it is suggested that when a member has an unexcused absence from any of the mandatory events such as formal pledging, Founders Day, initiation, membership recruitment, and or the membership selection activities, that she's immediately called into a standards meeting. When this member misses one of these mandatory events, the recording secretary would contact the VPS and give her the names of any member who missed one of these mandatory chapter events. These women would then be called into a standards committee meeting with the VPS and her committee. So you've called this member into a standards committee meeting, and the committee and the VPS should definitely be sure that they think about how they want to address the member's attendance issue. What kind of terms do they want to assign to this member so that this member benefits from her probation? Be sure that you're talking over with the member what's causing these attendance problems. Is it just a lack of respect for the activities that your chapter is planning, or is it something more like time management, stress, or maybe an emotional issue? Try and get to the root of the problem so that you can really assign probation terms that will benefit this member. So leading into that, I have some suggested probation terms for attendance issues. These are also listed in our suggested guidelines and probation term ideas document that is under the Vice President Standards resource page on the CAPA website. But I've taken out a few so you can look at them now. So you could maybe have this member review the chapter attendance rule in your chapter's bylaws and standing rules. Make sure that they're attending all required events. Maybe they volunteer X amount of hours to a local nonprofit, and the X amount of hours should equal the amount of hours they missed at that event. Maybe they help plan a chapter retreat, or they help plan a sisterhood function with the standards committee. Maybe since this person's been missing some CAPA events, they don't know the new member pledge class very well, so maybe it would be a good idea for them to attend the new member retreat and get to know your new members. Maybe they could make an attendance policy poster and hang it around your chapter facility or in the bathrooms or in the chapter room so that members can understand what that policy is. They could also help the VPO plan a welcome party for members that come from being abroad, or the leadership consultant, or any fraternity visitors that you may have coming to your chapter throughout that semester. And then a few others are you could pick from the job jar list. So we want to make sure that you try and have the duty related to the missed function. So maybe if the member missed initiation or fireside, she would need to wash and iron the initiation robes. Or if she missed a recruitment event, she could straighten out the recruitment closet with the recruitment chair in her committee. Maybe if she missed something that she needed to be at for the new members, like the pledging ceremony or something like that, she could help the new member plan the retreat. She could help write thank you notes for recruitment or initiation for any fraternity visitors you might have, or write thank you notes to your advisory board and house board members for their support. And she could also help set up chairs for chapter meeting if she has been missing chapter meetings more than 3 times with an unexcused absence. So another big job for the recording secretary and the vice president standards is making revisions to the chapter bylaws and standing rules. So every 2 years after the general convention or as necessary, the recording secretary should work with all of the chapter council officers and standing committee chairmen to revise the chapter bylaws and standing rules. The VPS would come into play here because she would be assigned her sections in the chapter documents, and she should be reviewing those and revising those as necessary and work closely with the recording secretary to get those changes made so they can be voted on by the entire chapter. And finally, we just want to cover some keys to success, some reminders that communication is key always in any chapter council relationship and in any chapter business. The recording secretary must keep accurate and timely records of all absences. As Katie mentioned, sometimes an advisor or a different officer might be keeping the absences, but the recording secretary needs to make sure that she is in good communication with those individuals so that her records are accurate, so the standards committee can do their job as well. That leads me to the standards committee liaison, and she must be sure that she is communicating with the recording secretary on a weekly basis so that members are called into standards in a timely and efficient manner. We want to make sure that you're holding all of your members accountable and that members don't slip through the cracks. We want to make sure that we're helping members if there are bigger issues than just attendance. Also, be sure to remind your members of your chapter attendance rules on a regular basis. Maybe that's where that poster can come into play. If a member has to make that for one of her probation terms, the recording secretary could just go over those every so often at a chapter meeting so that every member is aware of what is expected of her. So I know we covered a lot of information, but that is the gist of what the recording secretary and the vice president standards should be doing to make things run smoothly when it comes to attendance. So we thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to one of us